Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch Podcast. My name is Cameron English, your host as always, joined by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. What's going on, Chuck?
It's a good time. My grandchild is visiting me. I'm remembering now why being a parent is a young man's game, because I am exhausted.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is pretty tiring, especially when you have other things that you have to do. And I know you are very familiar with that because kids require so much attention. And you're like, why are you being so selfish? It's funny because they can't be selfish, right? Their brains aren't developed enough. That's the joke, everybody.
No.
All right. Well, let's jump into our story for the day. Chuck, this is another piece that you wrote, and it's, if I might say so, quite fascinating. And again, very practical topic. This seems to be your physician brain at work, trying to address issues that actually affect people's well-being, unlike many of the things we talk about today. So this story is called, Can Bite-Sized Exercise Save Your Life? So here's the introduction, and then you can do a deep dive, Dr. Dinnerstein. So you write, introducing exercise snacking, tiny bursts of vigorous exercise that can fit into even the busiest schedules. While it may sound like a lazy person's dream, recent studies suggest these mini workouts can significantly boost your health, making them the ultimate life hack for the chronically time-crunched. Okay, break it down for us, Doctor. What are you talking about here?
Okay, so I have to admit, as soon as I saw an exercise snack, I got excited that there was some type of food I could eat that would exercise for me. But as it turns out, we're not talking about that at all. What we're really talking about is 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of high intense exercise spaced out across the day. So let's roll it back a little bit and say that the guidelines say that we should be spending anywhere from 1 to 5 hours a week involved in vigorous physical exercise, which begins somewhere with mowing the lawn with a manual lawnmower, and works its way up from there. I guess cleaning carpets with a carpet sweeper rather than a vacuum would also qualify. And the difficulty for many of us is that it's tough to find time in our day to get in those workouts. If you go to a gym, which I used to do, for a half an hour workup, there's at least another half an hour of getting there and showering afterwards and changing. So it takes a big chunk out of the day. And for a couch potato, I don't need a lot more of a hurdle than having to spend extra time to do it. So this is really an interesting life hack. And basically what they've discovered is that that 4 or 5 hours of exercise across the week can be aggregated. It doesn't all have to be done in half an hour or hour blocks. And the exercise snack is the version of that. It comes from high-intensity interval training. And in this particular study, they took another nearly 200,000 adults from the UK Biobank, which these people must be exhausted from all the research projects that they are involved in. And they had monitors placed rather than self-reporting their exercise. So they were able to gather data on how vigorous their exercise was and how often that they were exercising that. And then, of course, they compared it to something like how many of them were dead after several years. And what they found in kind of an optimistic way was they came up with, as all good scientists do, a dose-response curve, which is probably a little bit silly in this setting. And what they found was that while 75 minutes of vigorous exercise a week was optimal, if you did 20 minutes, you got 40% of that efficacy, but even better if you did 2 minutes of vigorous exercise 4 times a day. That was 27%. So now we're talking 8 minutes. And pretty much anybody can manage 8 minutes, especially when you start thinking about how that's done. And I think I've said this before. Instead of driving around for 5 minutes looking for the closest parking space to the gym or the food market, park at the back of the lot, and briskly walk up to the front. That'll get you a minute or two right there. Taking the stairs rather than waiting for the elevator would work. And I freely admit I cheat. I am always a big advocate of taking the stairs down. Taking the stairs up is a little bit harder to get me to do, but I have done it on some occasions. So I think that it's an interesting approach, and it gets around the problem that I talk about in a different article, which is called, described as loss of voltage. When you do these very controlled studies, you get some very great results, but the power, the voltage of the study is lost in translation when it's translated into the real world because you don't have the same monitoring that's going on. In this case, you really have a real world approach that doesn't lose voltage at all. Everybody can spare 8 minutes a day to do some exercise. And so I think that that's really the gist of what was going on.
So let's talk about this idea of a dose response curve, which is interesting to me because in this context, you're looking at, presumably you're trying to at least estimate what the long-term impacts of the sort of interval training, you can't even call it training, right? The sort of interval vigorous exercise. Talk more about that because it doesn't seem to make sense, right? If you have a dose response curve for like bleach, for example, right? You're looking for an effect that you know being exposed to that amount will do.
Right. Well, the math is the same. So, what they did is they looked across the Great Sweep, and they looked at the people that survived, leaving out the dead people. And of the people that survived, they were able to measure how much time they spent doing vigorous exercise. And they could also determine, because they were doing this over a longitudinal period of time, whether doing 30% of the exercise, how many people survived when they were doing 30% of the work, or 50% of the work, or 80% of the work. But it makes sense in a quantitative world when we're talking about drugs and measurements. It makes less sense in the world of exercise, where even though they're wearing a monitor, that monitor doesn't actually measure their exertion overall. It measures their movement and does some assumptions about that. It's like any of the other fitness trackers that, that track your footsteps and tell you how many miles you went, but it's based on the average step length. My wife is taller than me. I'm always trying to catch up with her, and she says, get your teeny little feet moving to catch up. So I need 3 steps for her too, is to do the same distance. So that's the difficulty with this. The whole, the concept of a dose response curve when we're talking about exercise. Same thing. There's many times we tell you how much stress, you can be under if you're under 2 hours of stress versus 8 hours of stress. So they can come up with hour and a half of stress is just enough because it allows for hormesis and you can get better. But anything longer than that can be detrimental. This is why we come up with these bizarre numbers.
Maybe I didn't read the paper. Maybe you have some insight here, but I wonder to what extent the results that they uncovered are due to something else. So like the people that exercised up to the standard that they're measuring, maybe they eat better, maybe they're more physically active anyway. Yes. Talk about that.
Right. There's the lifestyle issues are not adjusted for, and even if they were attempted to do it, you would still run into our food diaries and all the rest of it. So it's certainly reasonable to say that people that are willing to spend the time exercising probably have other healthy lifestyle choices that they've made, and so they're there. On the other hand, to be perfectly fair, if you're willing to do, 5 or 6 exercise snacks a day, then you too are already moving in the direction of more healthy lifestyle. So I personally, I spend part of my day jumping to conclusions, and with the grandchild here, I've been running amok. So those are big exercises that I can do routinely.
I wonder to what extent, and this may not even be conscious in a study like this, but I wonder to what extent these sorts of experiments are motivated by a recognition that people just aren't active enough, right? It almost seems like we're saying, just get off your ass and move for like 8 minutes a day, like just a little bit, you know what I mean? Like we're sort of
Just
accepting
do it.
that people,
Exactly.
yeah, like I can't drive to the gym and spend an hour and a half taking care of my fitness. I'm busy, right? Well, just run up the
You're
stairs,
busy.
please. Like I think, what do you think about that?
Well, no, we don't prioritize these issues. We're busy doing other things, and there's you know a body at rest tends to remain at rest, and a body in motion tends to remain in motion. To steal from physics, but it's true in our personal habits too. And so it's again, if you can make that switch, if you can get used to spending, and now the magic dose response on habits is 30 days, doing the habit, then it will become more instilled and it is something you can do. And again, I found that when I was working, it was oftentimes easier to take the stairs and go up one or two flights of stairs. And I think from the sense that the real take-home message from exercise snacking is to just get out and to be more active. Given a choice between the sedentary way and the active way, choose the active way. And in the end, it will pay off in terms of your overall fitness.
Final question as we wrap up here. Is there any risk in encouraging someone to engage in this? For some of this, I imagine not, right? If you're saying instead of sitting on your ass, go vacuum or go mow the lawn, that's probably okay. But you had one commenter point out that in some cases, at least, when you take people who are sedentary and they're unfit, they have very poor fitness, and then you jump them into something like interval training, that can actually cause apparently a significant risk of cardiac arrest because it's such a shock to their system,
Well,
presumably.
it's going to increase their heart rate, and if there's any kind of underlying atherosclerotic disease involving their conduction system, it's certainly possible to develop an arrhythmia. On the other hand, just to argue from the other hand, Jim Fixx, noted runner, died of an arrhythmia too, and he was in fabulous shape. So, I have a tough time seeing somebody that's completely deconditioned jumping into vigorous exercises right away. No one that's coming in with a BMI of 40 is going to be running up any stairs real soon. But if we can get them to climb the stairs, climb the 2 flights of stairs, that's already a step in the right direction. Bottom line.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Like they're so out of shape that their body will not allow them to do the amount of exercise that could kill them.
Right.
It's pretty
Yeah. Yeah.
fascinating. Okay, well, it seems the conclusion, as always, is a little bit of moderation, a little bit of exercise is good for you, which you could have known without ever having read or paid for this study. So there we are again
True.
with another life problem solved, as we tend to do on the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, follow us on social media. The organization is at ACSH.org. On Twitter, I am at CamJEnglish. Send us your questions and comments. Subscribe to the newsletter. Just go to ACSH.org. Click the subscribe tab up top. Punch in your email address. We'll send these articles right to your inbox. And then when you show up, you'll know what we're talking about. So with that, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.